Imagination is more important than knowledge, for knowledge is limited to all we now know and understand, while imagination embraces the entire world and all there will ever be to know and understand. Albert Einstein. As a storyteller, I find it useful to suggest, though mostly to myself, that imagination is a consequence of a mutually beneficial relationship between knowledge and dreaming. However, as I will discuss later, I want to suggest that dreaming is in some ways conditioned by one's circumstances. The question that I can't get away from is whether one can ever truly dream outside of one's own existence. Can the little girl who has never even heard of a plane imagine one day flying in such a thing, let alone being a pilot? Or can a 14-year-old me imagine stepping out of Mr. Motsakwa's class, where I was forced to recite a poem in front of my entire secondary school, to standing years later in front of 7,000 people at a festival in Colombia? We fashion our dreams with the tools that we have at our disposal. And what we know as our reality serves as a boundary or a beginning to what we can imagine is possible. This is dreams. Dreams are evil, and I prefer nightmares. They show you what goes on in here reflects what goes on out there. Dreams lie. They lead you down a path where white chocolate flows undammed and mulberries fall unshaken from the trees. Nothing is less faithful, less real, or more untrue than a dream. Ask yourself, does your every waking moment have to be this hard? I, for one, am tired of spending sleepless nights, chasing hesitant tomorrows, biding my time just to spend it mending broken things that have no wish to be fixed. So I will not spin and spin inside the skin. I will not spin and spin inside the skin. I will not mourn a future I never had. I refuse to bleed myself on almost reality rooted in the distant echoes of a once upon a voice chanting, I know I can, because I know I can. Be the girl I am right now. Live the life I have right now. Maybe even choose to be the dream I'm in right now. Maybe then it won't seem so hard just to breathe right now. I want to suggest that imagination is perhaps a much more controlled type of wakeful dreaming, as opposed to, say, daydreaming, which, at least when it happens to me, almost exclusively comes upon me uninvited, temporarily mobilizes me until one reality or another snaps me out of my reverie. I also want to believe that within the individual, there is neither a death nor a dearth of imagination. That is, there is no end to it and no lack of it. I believe that imagination is an internal language that one speaks back to oneself, that by imagining, you are actually in conversation with yourself and possible selves. But is imagination being subsumed by the hegemonic or the shared language of knowledge? Do we value cold facts over literary imagination? We seem to be drawn to the stability of knowledge because of its repeatability. If you do X and dance around Y, you get Z. And someone else, somewhere else can test this equation and get the same or similar result, while imagination is much more open-ended. And so it's often relegated to the realm of the gifted ones. Oh, it's for the poets, it's for the artists, it's for the children, or those who can manifest their personal imagination in a manner that is readable to society. However, I think that the language of imagination is always bigger than the boxes we package it in. I also just want to ask how valuable imagination is to the community. Research scientist Kathleen Taylor has a wonderful paper that speaks on the imagination-knowledge ratio, how and when it shifts with society at the helm. She speaks to the usefulness of imagination in, and I quote, helping us to solve problems, anticipate challenges, and conceive alternatives. She goes on to say, as our realities become more complex, we seem increasingly to prefer imagination. But that preference is culture dependent. Imagination flourishes when its products are highly valued. When I quit my job 5 years ago to read and write poetry, everyone said that I was crazy. And of course they were right. But the trouble there, I think, is that my imagination of what success might look like was probably very, very different from theirs. And that journey is a story for another day. What interests me now is that half a decade later, the question has changed from why would you do it to how did you do it? I imagined, against all odds, given my geographical location, my then age, my gender, and I bring these up because when I began writing in Botswana, almost all of the local poets that I knew were men and mostly elderly. This is not to say that you don't have writers like Dokas Molefe and Pinky Mekwe, all women who occupied space, literary spaces in their own way. But even in that imagined vacuum, I imagined that I might be able to fashion a little room from which I might write and perhaps access a stage from which to read. And this many years later, and countless countries visited, poetry remains my passport to the world. And as I mentioned earlier, it's only now that I've been able to make my internal language of imagination readable to the outside that there is some externally perceived value in it. I'm also a great believer in literature, including fiction's ability to humanize, to rehumanize the human condition. David Palambulu is professor of comparative literature at Stanford, and he has an article titled Poetry, Politics, Plasticity, Reimagination. And in it he says, and I quote, literature can help us understand the disconnection between dry statistics and the profound inequalities in lives on the ground. It can animate an ethical and poetic reappraisal of these disparities. Part of what I'm interested in is the position of the one who imagines, the one who thinks a creative language in response to the variables of our socio-political geography, specifically issues of gender and social inequality. Street Vendor is a spoken word poem written around the time I started performing publicly, and what follows is a short excerpt. In her world, your reality is a joke, and love a yoke that chokes till she forgets to laugh, so she barters with her God daily, yet there are no diamonds on her wish list. You see, some choices are easier to make than others, like bread and milk, bread for milk, bread or milk that comes with no fist, because on her street, the women still gather and meet to count calories to feed their young ones empty bellies with sun-baked promises fulfilled on back seats and hidden alleys. Not for fame or fortune, these women have never met either, not for glory neither. These women simply sell what they have, and when there's nothing left, they sell who and what they are. So today there will be no Sky Blue, SABC, and DSM, or whatever TV endorsement of this beat, only this poetry from Africa's streets. There are no timekeepers here, no hi, I'm home, dear. Just life, one heartbeat at a time. History tells us that her story is only one of millions, and from our varied vantage points, it's unlikely that we will ever all agree on what constitutes a better world. But we can agree that whatever the individual narratives, the student asking for affordable education, the informal domestic worker praying for running water so she can earn her pay that day, the kid dreaming of tasting ice cream for the first time, or the self-proclaimed conservationist looking to save the African lion from extinction, whatever we individually imagine as better is, can be, or should be communally important. But perhaps because the world is quickly becoming unlivable, we may feel that the earth is becoming the great leveler of our experience. But this is open to dispute because of the glaring economic disparities on the ground. So I cannot with any conviction speak about building a perfect world or any kind of utopia. In fact, on a recent road trip traveling to the north of Botswana with my partner, he turned to me and said, "Isn't it ironic that the perfect imagined place in literary terms actually means no place?" By this, he meant that the word utopia comes from the Greek utopos, which literally translates to no place. So what part do we play in keeping this place, the world we do have? Can we even begin to imagine talking or of building a new world when we are hard-pressed to imagine preserving what's left of our planet? Perhaps in future, the best idea of a better world will be the one we now have or the one we have had. Imagine that. This is bread for the birds. It rose above us like a god, and I remember thinking who or what would willingly give wings to such rage. But there it was, and so a benefactor must exist. Somewhere behind this communal mirror glass, a huge, angry, beastly cloud of a thing is setting its course and likening it to mine and yours. I remember seeing the sky as it scrunched its face, filling its cheeks with smoke and hurling rage at every man's door, at life's very factory gate, huffing and puffing till it ceased, sneezed, pouring citrus rain upon us. Yet none of us, no, not one of us, knew what to call it. And since that day, it always seems as though no matter what we do, for each birth, we must give away one more than we will receive. For each 10 dead, perhaps 5 daughters will be born to remind us how we should have held on to what we had before fortune called, before tomorrow was gone. For we are but bread for the birds, dead before our very breath is heard, light as lead feathers lost to the wind. We sing in a quagmire of our own making. And to look at us now, we are not much more than jaded shopkeepers with nothing left to sell. Merchants charmed into a blindfolded trade against the merciless rage and the machines. They do not even care whether we live or die. This war to them is nothing personal. In this war to them, we are the ones on a fool's errand. Nothing more than a misguided tribe of greenhouse tail chasers, if we but knew it. Yet when the summer does not an end seem to find, and the ice crackles quiet against your feet of clay, will you know then the sound of death coming? It is not loud or crass. The earth will not crash upon herself, merely to warn you of your folly. The wind will no longer howl her protest at the closed window of your soul. And when hot becomes the new cold, will we remember then what the prophets of old foretold, how they spoke of an ungrateful tribe turning a king's providence into a tomb? For in this gingerbread man existence, we think ourselves gods, changing things, breaking things, to live as kings, leaving costly crumbs wherever we go. Yet you and I are but bread for the birds. We are the baker and the baked. Our deeds name us the sly fox, and still we are running as fast and as far as we can from these facts and ourselves. And when our turn upon this wheel is done, our sons, our daughters into this chaos will run, and they will mourn the authors of their demise with a truth as sincere as a lie. But we are all guests here, and so perhaps I speak too soon, and you are a voice dissident amidst the few. They will ask you who you think you are to find your own right when everyone else is left behind. Tell them you know your castle is made of sand and air, that you and I are a thing alone, fragile, breakable, exposed in this roofless fort. And that nameless thing that started it all, it was us all along.